what you were made of. Hearts of stone, never leave this world till you let go, till you let go. Hearts of stone, never leave this world till you let go, till you let go, till you let go, till you let go, and learn to live, learn to love. You learn to cry, you learn if you run and you give up, then they hold you down long enough until you knew what you were made of. 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 What you were made
Good morning. My name is Adam Garnet Jones, and I am the lead of Indigenous initiatives at TELEFILM Canada. And I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about TELEFILM's programs for specifically for Indigenous filmmakers, but also for anyone interested in applying to programs at all, because all of the programs at TELEFILM are open for Indigenous filmmakers as well. So it's always your choice which program that you want to apply for. I'm Cree and Métis from just outside of Edmonton, and I'm living in Toronto these days. So if there's one thing that you take away from this, it's just basically, if you have any questions about things, give me a call. Give me a call, send me an email. I'm, time permitting, I'm always happy to talk with filmmakers about their projects and about how to access the programs. So this is all that you're going to get to see until the Q&A for of my beautiful mug, because I'm going to share my screen now and take you through some of the programs through the magic of Zoom. Okay. Excellent. So you should be able to see the PowerPoint now. So I'm going to just take you through starting with the idea of narrative sovereignty and where TELEFILM is at with its programs in supporting narrative sovereignty for Indigenous filmmakers. So a number of years ago, TELEFILM committed to a $4 million per year stream of funding for Indigenous creators in production and development. And also to TELEFILM committed to having an Indigenous jury evaluate those proposals. So it's not TELEFILM staff making recommendations about which projects get funded. It's Indigenous jury members who are pulled from the production community. So writers, directors, producers, sometimes people who are film festival programmers and that kind of thing as well. The other criteria is that in order to be supported in the Indigenous stream, you must be considered an Indigenous production. Now, in order to do that, we had to figure out what an Indigenous production is. So in consultation with community, we came up with this definition, which may change over time, but for now, this is what it is. So for telefilm, an Indigenous production is a production where at least 51% of the production's copyright is held by a company whose majority shareholder or shareholders are Indigenous. So you have a majority Indigenous ownership in the company, and then 2 out of 3 of the key creative team members are also Indigenous. So we consider the 3 key creative members of the team to be the writer, the director, and the producer. So 2 out of 3 of those people need to be Indigenous, and then it qualifies as an Indigenous production. I'm starting with that just as a kind of a baseline, because when you're navigating the programs, it's really good to know which program that you might be eligible for, because sometimes if you've got an Indigenous team and you meet the bar for an Indigenous production, you could apply to the Indigenous stream, or you might find reasons that you want to apply for mainstream funding. And there's advantages to doing either of those things. And that's one of the things that I like to talk with filmmakers about as far as deciding where you want to submit an application. So moving on, we'll start with development. So the development program supports Canadian production companies that are looking to finance the development stage of their feature film projects. So this is basically funding for producers to hire writers. And sometimes in the Indigenous stream, the writer and the producer are the same person, and sometimes it's a producer hiring a writer who's different than themselves. Often within telefilm, there's automatic financing that's given out to companies based on their track record. So companies that have released a bunch of different feature films, that have been successful in theaters, that have earned a certain amount of box office, that have won major awards at film festivals, all of those things help to build the company's track record. And if a company has enough points from that track record, they can get a certain amount of automatic financing for development of their scripts. There's not a ton of Indigenous companies in Canada that fall into that category. That's much more of like a late stage of your career kind of situation. And a lot of people in the community are at kind of an emerging and mid-career stage. So there's also selective development. In order to be eligible for selective development through the main envelope, that's like the mainstream program that everyone is going to, you have to have released a feature film theatrically in the last 5 years. So again, thinking about who's eligible for that, that's a pretty small range of companies that are working in Canada. And an even smaller number of those are Indigenous. So Telefilm has also created the Indigenous Selective Development Program. Now that program is much more open in terms of eligibility. In order to be eligible for that money, you have to have a credit as a producer on a qualifying short film or TV. And in order to qualify for that short film, you have to screen that film at a list of festivals. And the festival list is actually pretty long and pretty generous. So basically, if you've made something and exhibited it professionally, then most likely you'll be eligible for this selective development program. That money gets taken out of that overall $4 million fund that's been committed to Indigenous creators. So on average, we support about 10 scripts, that's 10 projects, at about $18,000 per project, which again, that's money to support writers. $18,000 can buy a writer a fair amount of time to get through a first draft of a script, or to move from the treatment phase into a first draft, second draft to third draft. All of those different stages are eligible. An additional kind of development support that's available is for targeted groups. This funding is a little bit trickier, not necessarily trickier to get, but just trickier to understand, because in order to qualify for the targeted group funding, you need to approach a producer who has automatic financing. So going back to the top point on the PowerPoint, so if you find a company that has automatic financing for development within their company, they can also qualify for the development of scripts from targeted groups. So you as a writer and a producer of a feature film project, if you are women, official language minority communities, or emerging, you could approach those producers and say, hey, can you support my script as an application under targeted groups funding for development with Telefilm. So that means that you have to do some networking to find out what producers are out there who have that kind of automatic financing, make a connection with them, build a relationship with them, pitch them your project, get their support, and then come in with an application. That can sometimes be a really great way for people to develop a mentorship relationship with producers who are a little bit more experienced. But sometimes it's easier for people to come in for Indigenous selective development simply because it's easier to qualify. And once you qualify, you can just put your application together and get your projects in front of a jury. I should say, as I'm going through this, I know that there's going to be probably a lot of questions about this stuff. There will be time for questions at the end. So if you have questions about development, just like write them down. You can toss them into the comment section on the side on Facebook, and then we can get to those at the end. Or if it feels like something that's really urgent, I can just kind of incorporate it into what I'm talking about. But hopefully I'll get to most of your questions just in the course of going through this PowerPoint. So let's talk about production. So the production program, this is again like the general mainstream program that anyone can apply to. This program supports Canadian production companies who are looking to finance the production or post on their feature films. There is a below $2.5 million budget. That's the range that most productions fall into. You have to have a budget of more than $250,000 and less than $2.5 million to qualify for that fund. The next category up is productions with budgets over $2.5 million. Then there's a fast track stream for second feature films. So if you've made a feature, release that feature, and it's won awards at specific prestigious festivals, then you can qualify for an automatic second feature film. That's pretty rare. It's kind of a high bar to meet. But there have been filmmakers in the community who've met that bar, and there's at least one that's moving on to make their second feature through that stream. The last is the Indigenous stream. So that's the Indigenous stream of production funding, which is the production equivalent to the Indigenous development stream we were talking about earlier. So the Indigenous production stream is about $3.8 million because about $200,000 gets set aside for development. So $3.8 million for production funds. And then the last piece of the production puzzle is Talent to Watch. Talent to Watch is a program that's set up for the funding of first feature films and web projects from emerging filmmakers. It's intended to kind of discover new talent and accelerate career development and allow filmmakers to develop an expertise in marketing and promotion of their projects. So the way that fund works is a little bit different from the others, because all the other production programs, you as a producer are applying directly to Telefilm, and there's specific criteria. With Talent to Watch, Telefilm partners with a whole bunch of different schools, film co-ops, film festivals, training organizations, that kind of thing. And what happens is the filmmakers apply directly to the film festival, school, or training organization, the partner organization. And that partner organization recommends usually one or two projects to Telefilm. And then from that pool of recommended projects, a jury meets and they talk about and make decisions on what's going to get funded out of those projects that have been recommended from all across the country. Within the Talent to Watch program, there's a selective stream, but there's also an Indigenous component and an official language minority communities component. The Indigenous component of Talent to Watch is evaluated by the same Indigenous jury that's making decisions about the Indigenous projects in the production stream. So the process is very similar, where once the partner organization recommends a project, it then goes to Telefilm, and Telefilm submits that project to the Indigenous jury. And the Indigenous jury scores the project and makes decisions about what's going to get funded. The last we've got here is theatrical documentary. The theatrical documentary program supports Canadian production companies looking to finance feature-length docs in production and post-production. So that theatrical documentary fund tends to be pretty competitive because it's the only fund within Telefilm that mainstream doc filmmakers can submit to for production. So in general, when you go into the theatrical documentary fund, you, as a producer, have most of your financing locked in or close to being locked in. So when you're applying for production funding through the Indigenous stream, through the mainstream programs, through Talent to Watch, Telefilm is often the first in. It's the first funder that's investing in the project. People have relationships with distributors, people have relationships with broadcasters, but they might not have all that money committed. In the theatrical documentary stream, because it's so incredibly competitive, it tends to be the case that people already have the bulk of their financing in place. And so as a result, it tends to be a program that's geared more toward established filmmakers. That said, there's a number of Indigenous films that have been supported through the Theatrical Doc Fund, including Tasha Hubbard's last film, We Will Stand Up, which just won the Canadian Screen Award for Best Canadian Documentary. So there are people who are making their films through that fund and making them with a great deal of success. I didn't mention when I was speaking about the production program of the Indigenous stream that you can also go to that stream with a documentary project. And what else did I not say? In terms of budget for the Indigenous stream, I spoke about there being different budget tiers. So there's Talent to Watch. So that's evaluated by the Indigenous jury and is supported by the Indigenous stream. There's the tranche of funding that's for films below $2.5 million. Those projects are supported within the Indigenous stream by the jury. And the Indigenous jury, through the Indigenous stream, can also look at higher budget projects with budgets above $2.5 million. So that Indigenous stream is really looking at projects at all budget levels, and the Indigenous stream has supported projects from that Talent to Watch budget level of $150,000 right on up to projects with budgets of, let me think here, probably the highest would be maybe a $7 or so million budget. So that's a pretty big spread. Again, I'm sure you have a million questions about the production program, but just type those questions into the comments if we can get to them in a little bit. Moving on to promotion support. So these are the programs that exist to support creators and the whole chain of distribution of a film. So once you've got a film that's finished, this is mostly speaking to features. The promotion team can help you to get to film festivals internationally, to travel and support the promotion of your film. There is a marketing fund to help support the theatrical release and marketing of your feature film when it's finished. As you can see here, there's also support for international marketing, theatrical exhibition, and export assistance. So I'm not going to spend as much time on those pieces. In some ways, because that's not what I spend the bulk of my time doing day to day. Usually my time is spent on development and production. But also it tends to be the case that by the time a person has completed a feature film and has gone through telefilm through all those previous stages, you're pretty plugged into the process. And so the promotional support is something that becomes clear once you start asking questions of the people within telefilm that you've already been dealing with. But if you do have production or promotion questions, by all means, please do feel free to ask those in the comment. Let's go in here and let's go into the last slide here. So the team, I don't know if you want to screen grab this, but again, if you ever want to talk about the production program or development or anything else within telefilm, you can give me a shout at this email address. My office line is also posted on the website. If you are a French language speaker and you want to speak with someone in French about the way that financing works in Quebec, you can speak to Marie-France, and her email is there. And as you can see, there's emails for Peggy Lanus and Randall Fox, who can also give you a hand. Randall Fox is an Indigenous coordinator who's based out of Vancouver. So if you're out west, he's a really great person to get in touch with, because sometimes the time zone thing can be a little bit of a hassle when you're trying to get in touch with people. All right, so I'm going to jump back so that you can see my face, and it looks like we've got some questions coming in the comments. So let me just stop sharing my screen here. So the question from Gloria is, since the Aboriginal languages legislation has been passed, does Telefilm have a program catered to films created only using Indigenous languages? That's a really great question. There isn't a fund at Telefilm specifically for films in Indigenous languages, but there are people who are applying to the Indigenous production stream who are working all in Indigenous languages. And that's something that, because the jury is made up of people from the community, working with the language in that way tends to be something that the jury values really highly. So I think that those projects would tend to score very well, because it's just it's a high priority in the community right now. It's a high priority for filmmakers. But so far there isn't a specific language fund. There is a specific language fund through the Canada Media Fund that you can apply to, and you could reach out to me or to my colleague, Jill Sampson at the CMF, about that fund. Have we got other questions? Maybe one of the Lindsay's or Adam has got a question that you might want to ask about the programs. It's so funny, I just blasted right through that PowerPoint. Okay, let me just. So I'm going to speak a little bit about where I've come from and how I started in doing this work. Before coming to Telefilm, I was working primarily as a writer and director, and I released a couple of feature films that I directed. One of them was called Fire Song, the other was called Great, Great, Great. And over a number of years, I was involved with a group of filmmakers who was advocating for Telefilm to create this $4 million fund within Telefilm. And then, kind of long story short, they were looking for someone to administer the fund. And as a result of the barriers that I felt like I had been kind of coming up against over the years of trying to have a career, I felt like I had more energy to work at Telefilm and support the ongoing work of trying to help advance other filmmakers than work on my own productions, to be honest. So that's why I ended up here. And it's been a really exciting time because when I went to make my first feature, I had a lot of people who were really encouraging and really excited about the writing that I was doing. But because of the subject matter, I heard again and again and again from the industry that there was really no appetite and no support for the films that I wanted to make because they were dark and they're dealing with Two-Spirit people, youth suicide, Indigenous people living in community, and so the question and the response that I had from community, from the production community, a lot of the time was that they really wanted to see the films that I was working on get made, but there would be no money available in the industry to make them. So again, that's why I got motivated to do this work. So we have a question from Emery about animated films and telefilm. So with telefilm, there really aren't any genre restrictions at all. So if you want to come in with an animation, with an experimental feature film, with a documentary, within the Indigenous stream, all of that is really wide open. What you need to be able to do is tell your story and be really clear and articulate about what the film is that you want to make and how exactly you're going to make it, because lots of times people speak about their ideas in a way that the jury really responds to, but then when they see the script, when they see how the film is intending to be executed, the jury can see that the filmmaker hasn't quite thought through the execution as much as they've thought through that really exciting core of the idea. So with animation or with documentary or with a more kind of experimental fiction film, it's absolutely eligible for the program, but you still have to be able to tell your story, clearly express your ideas, and also prove that the film can be financed. So to talk about getting tax credits, to talk about support from broadcasters, to talk about supports that you're going to get from private investors and all of those kinds of things. So really the same set of rules apply, and it's really genre agnostic as long as it fits that idea of a theatrical feature film. So Tyson, oh, hang on, there's somebody before Tyson. Da-da-da-da. So Luther is asking, has there been anybody that has skipped over the Talent to Watch program and entered directly into the mainstream funding programs? That's a really great question. Yes. So one of the #1 mistakes that people make, and this is not Indigenous filmmakers, this is all filmmakers across the country, I think, is feeling like they have to come to Talent to Watch to make their first feature film. And what happens is that a lot of times people come in and they've got a great idea, they've got a great script, they've got a terrific team, they have a track record with shorts, you know, the jury really wants to support them, and then they look at the script and they're like, if we support this film in Talent to Watch, it's actually going to be doing them a disservice because they can't really make this movie the way it should be made at a budget that small. So there have been filmmakers who come in for their first feature at that low budget level. So films below $2.5 million. And there's also been filmmakers who've come in at the high budget level, making films over $2.5 million for their first film. And some filmmakers, Indigenous filmmakers, have done that through the Indigenous stream, and some filmmakers have done that through the Indigenous stream as well. So I think it's really important to be honest with yourself about where are you at in your career? Like if you've been making shorts, how well have those shorts done? Have they screened at top tier international festivals? Have they won significant awards? And if so, then that puts you in a really unique position to be able to approach real players in the industry and take that leap into your first feature at a higher budget level. If you're coming in and you've made some shorts and you really still feel like you're kind of finding your voice, and the shorts that you've made have traveled around to festivals a bit, but haven't really kind of made that impact and gotten the buzz that you would like, then coming in at like a lower budget level or talent to watch might make more sense. I think that it often does make more sense to come in to talent to watch or that lower budget amount, if even just because the stakes are lower for your first film. Like if you're making it at a micro budget level, you can play with a lot of things. You can have the kind of creative freedom within a budget that you can't necessarily have at a higher budget level when you're worrying about union rules and tax credits and all kinds of other considerations that make a production so much more complex that it can hamper you as an artist. So I think sometimes the best thing for filmmakers to do is to write that low budget or micro budget project where you can explore and expand your skills and your artistry as a filmmaker and really develop your voice. And then once you've established that, to kind of grow into something larger. That said, sometimes you have that amazing idea and that amazing team that just can't wait. And you have done the work to prepare yourself and prepare your team and prepare a package that is going to be successful in the marketplace. And that's something that the only way to really know that is by taking a long, hard, honest look at your materials and getting people who aren't your friends and family to look at your materials and take their super honest, direct feedback about where you're at and how competitive your application is going to be. That's something that again, giving the time that I have, that I'm able to do for filmmakers, is read scripts, read applications, give feedback and give suggestions on them. And just a little note on that, it seems like the longer I'm in this job, the busier everything gets. But the best time for that, I think, is really the end of summer through December, January tends to be the best time to send scripts in to me or to other folks within the industry, just because of the way that the funding deadlines and notifications go out. So just keep that in mind. If you send me a script in June and you're thinking about applying for next year, I'm not going to be able to look at it until like August, September. And that's not because I'm ignoring you or mad at you. It's just because things are incredibly busy. So Adam has asked what the best first steps for filmmakers are to start accessing funding. It's kind of a tough question. I mean, I think that the best first steps, if you're not a producer, is to work with a producer or work with somebody who has a strong business mind, or is one of those kind of nuts and bolts, real detailed people who loves to plan and who loves to make spreadsheets and get things right. Find one of those people that you can work with and figure out, again, what you have. So a lot of times funding is dependent on the kind of project that you have in front of you. So if you have a documentary that's like a real political issue documentary that's getting a lot of heat on social media and in the mainstream media, maybe that's the kind of thing that you could build a bit of a following around, and work on crowdfunding. That's the kind of thing where you could maybe get development support from different film festivals to get them on board. You know, an experienced producer might say, hey, this is a good opportunity for us to come into a specific set of funds. Yeah, I mean, I really think that the first step to accessing funding is understanding what you have, and then talking to a lot of people about it so that you can understand who is the best place, who are the best people to approach for funding. Because sometimes people just, you know, they do kind of a scattershot approach where they just will apply to everything, and it takes a ton of time, and you can't really tailor applications properly if you're just applying for everything, regardless of whether or not it's appropriate for your project. So spend the time figuring out what you have, networking, talking to people about it, and then I think through asking those questions, you'll figure out what the first or the next steps are from there. Tyson's asking, what are some of the most successful Indigenous productions that Telefilm has supported? I think I mentioned earlier, Tasha Hubbard's documentary, We Will Stand Up, was very successful. The Body Remembers When the World Broke Open, which has also been incredibly successful this year and has been championed for distribution in the United States by Ava DuVernay. What's been considered the greatest Canadian film of all time by international film critics, At Narjuat, The Fast Runner, is an incredibly successful Canadian film made by Indigenous folks. Skawe Kuna, The Edge of the Knife, is a very successful film produced entirely in the Haida language a couple of years ago. Man, there's lots. Blood Quantum, I think Blood Quantum has been really successful in festivals, and it's that release is just rolling out. It's an amazing horror feature from Mi'kmaq filmmaker Jeff Barnaby. Yeah, there's tons. Angry Inuk, although I think the Angry Inuk have only been produced by the NFB, so that might not be a good example for these purposes, except that, you know, it's just an amazing film coming from our community. So yeah, there's been lots. So yeah, the question is from Emery is, would a short animatic or storyboards be accepted in the application? Absolutely. When you're coming in with an application to the production program, there's a list of required documents, and they're required, so obviously you need to send those in, but really think about what is specific to your project and how best to pitch your project. One of the things that isn't in the required documents is a pitch deck or a lookbook, and those are incredibly helpful for juries, incredibly helpful for decision makers. So if you think the best way to pitch your movie is by sending in an animatic, absolutely do that. If the best way to pitch your movie is by sending in a video of you talking about your movie, that's something that I've pushed to accept in the Indigenous stream. I think that can be really, really useful for directors to be able to give voice to their project, and for the jury to kind of virtually meet a filmmaker that way. Not everyone is the best presenting through text. So yeah, absolutely. If you've got an idea for a way that you want to pitch your project and it's not in those essential documents or required documents in an application, you can absolutely submit it. And if you have any questions about that, or if you feel weird about doing it, you can always just give me a call, and I'm sure I'll say it's fine. Next question from Dorval. Is there an opportunity for funding to increase in the near future? With so many filmmakers, $4 million seems fairly small. How difficult is it for Indigenous filmmakers to access mainstream funding? So there's a couple questions there. There may be an opportunity for funding to increase in the future. I think that probably at this point, there needs to be an increase in the overall budget of Telefilm, probably in order to increase that envelope, or an extraordinary amount of pressure from filmmakers to do that. So I guess like the short answer to that is not right now, but maybe in the future. And then the next question is, how difficult is it for Indigenous filmmakers to access funding? I mean, like, honestly, it's really hard for everyone to access funding, and particularly Indigenous filmmakers. That said, I think just the presence of someone in Telefilm who is connected to the community and thinking about Indigenous filmmakers and taking notice of applications coming in from Indigenous filmmakers when they arrive, and able to champion projects when they come in, has probably resulted in a greater number of projects being supported through the mainstream funds. But Indigenous projects still have to compete essentially at the same level as other filmmakers when they're submitting to the mainstream fund. So if you're coming in with a project to, low budget in Ontario or Atlantic or through the Western office, you still have to be able to demonstrate that your producers have the track record to be able to pull off a film of that size and scale and scope. You still have to be able to show that your financing plan is viable, and that the estimates that you've put into your financing plan for how much you think that you're going to be able to get from broadcasters, from distributors, from international sales, that all of that financing makes sense and is realistic for your project. So yeah, I guess all that to say, it's hard for Indigenous filmmakers to get funded through the mainstream, but it's also incredibly competitive for everyone else. But if you're thinking, hey, I've got this project and I'm not sure whether or not it makes more sense to submit to the main program or the Indigenous program, that's a great time to reach out to me, particularly if it's during that window earlier in the year, because then I can talk to you, I can look at your script, I can look at your application materials and say, you know what, this is fantastic. I think it could absolutely be competitive in the mainstream program. Or I might say, to be honest, based on your track record as a filmmaker, because you're more emerging, I think that this story will really resonate with the Indigenous jury, and they're probably going to overlook maybe like a less experience in your track record, or maybe they're more willing to overlook a financing plan that's like, a little edgy or something like that. But yeah, that'll just be the result of the conversation that we have, and then I'll advise you to the best of my ability, and then you'll be able to make a choice from there. Another question from Emery. Now that COVID-19 has changed the world and how people consume, will there be any changes to the experience and exposure thresholds to access funding? I mean, anecdotally, or based on my own subjective opinion, I think yes, probably, but there hasn't been anything official that's come to pass so far. I think that there will probably be a number of changes that take place between now and when the next set of guidelines for funding applications comes out in the fall, winter. But right now, the whole world is trying to figure out how to react. And so within Telefilm, people are taking suggestions from filmmakers, they're listening to producers, they're listening to distributors and exhibitors, just trying to get a sense of like, what is this new world going to look like, and what might those thresholds be? What might this new world of distribution look like, and what should the expectations of filmmakers be coming in? So all that to say, it's very much in process right now, but I think that you can expect changes. So which distribution streams are deemed acceptable? When you're coming in, you still have to have, like, it's the funding is intended to be for theatrical feature films. So at this point, theatrical is still a part of the way filmmakers should be talking about the release of their film. But if you know that that's not going to be a huge part of the way that your film is going to get out there, you can talk about a minimal theatrical distribution plan and get really detailed and really innovative with the digital release strategy, if that's where you want to put most of your energy. I think that there's a pretty wide recognition within Telefilm and within the industry as a whole that everyone's looking to figure out how best to get our films in front of audiences and our films to a position where they can make money for the producers and writers and directors and everyone involved in the productions. So if that's where you want to put the focus in your release plan, I think that that's great. That said, there still has to be a component of theatrical at this point until the guidelines change. But don't let that prevent you from being more innovative in the way that you speak about distributing and releasing your film. So question from Tyson, do we collaborate with other funding bodies like CBC Breaking Barriers, or is that the job of the producer? So mostly that is the job of the producer to do that legwork, but Telefilm can basically work with any of those funding bodies, and sometimes we do have sometimes there are unofficial conversations that happen between those bodies in times when funding decisions haven't been released yet, but one funder needs to know what another funder has decided in order to support their decision making. And it's kind of touchy, but sometimes that can happen. Sometimes information sharing can happen a little bit there, but mostly it's really up to the producer to liaise between bodies like Telefilm and Ontario Creates, the NFB, the Canada Council, if you're coming in with Talent to Watch project. Yeah, so sometimes we play a role, but often that is just the producer's responsibility. Awesome. I think that's everything that we have spoken about. So I just want to, while we're waiting for other questions, I think we've got a few minutes left. I wanted to talk a little bit about development again, because that's the newest, like the Indigenous development stream is something that's only been run once last year. So since it's the newest program, I think it'd be great to talk about it a little bit more. Again, it's a very open program in terms of who can apply. In order to be eligible for it, you need to have produced some TV or made some short films that have played in a professional context at a pretty long list of recognized festivals. But something about the development process is a little bit weird, and it resulted in some confusion last year. So in order to apply, you need to be deemed eligible to apply first. And that process can take a little bit of time. So if you're thinking about applying for the Indigenous development stream, you can clear your eligibility really at any time. So the first thing that you would do is go onto Telefilm, go onto the Telefilm website and set up a dialogue account if you don't have a dialogue account already. If you do have a dialogue account, then you would next send me an email saying, this is why I believe that I'm eligible, and you would list your production credits and the name of your incorporated company and the name of your company in dialogue. And then I forward that on to a committee that assesses the eligibility of your company to apply to the stream. And then when that's done, then you're able to apply to Dialogue with an application for your project. So sometimes what happens is people see the application deadline is, say, September 15th, and they'll say, okay, great, I have until September 15th to get my application materials in. So they work on their script, they work on their application, and then on September 10th, they go to open up the application and get their materials in, and they realize, oh, I don't have a Dialogue account. Oh, I set up my Dialogue account, and that doesn't take very long. And then they look and they realize that they're not able to apply. There's nothing in the drop-down menu that allows them to apply for the program. And that's because they haven't completed their eligibility yet. So all that to say, if you're thinking about coming in for that development program, please get in touch early, because I'd love to start that process with you so that there isn't a slowdown during that critical moment when you're thinking about putting in an application. Another thing about that development program that makes it a little bit special is something that a number of filmmakers really wanted Telefilm to do was to make sure that there was support for story editors in the development funds. Because normally when Telefilm supports development applications, there's $15,000 available per project. And that $15,000 mostly goes to the writer to write that treatment, to write that first draft, to write that second draft, whatever's being supported. But there's no money to support someone who's going to really work with the writer on the story and make that script as strong as it can possibly be. And any of you who are out there who are writers who've worked with story editors know that a good story editor, a really good reader who can work with you on clarifying your ideas and making sure that you're communicating those ideas as well as possible is, worth their weight in gold. So as a result, through the Indigenous development stream, you can apply for up to $18,000, and that additional $3,000 is intended to support the hiring of a story editor. So if you're coming in with an application, that's a really great thing to have already confirmed. So you can come in with your, say you're a producer and you're also the writer, you can come in and say, okay, I'm the producer writer. Here's the first draft of my screenplay. I'm looking for $18,000 in support. I have a really fantastic story editor, and here's an email from them confirming that they're going to participate and they're excited to participate in the project. And here's a cover sheet saying what I plan to do with this development money. So as a writer looking at your script, and maybe even looking at your script in consultation with the story editor, to make notes to the jury to say, if you give me this funding, these are the changes that I plan to make to my script. And I know that that can seem a little bit like, if you know what needs to be fixed in your script, then why do you need the money? But the thing about that is that often the jury is looking at these projects and they're reading the script or reading the treatment, and all they have to go on is the application that's in front of them. So if they look at it and they see problems in the script, it's really helpful for the jury to know that the writer knows those problems are there and that the writer has an idea for how to work through those problems. Because if the jury is looking at the script and they see, wow, there's a lot of potential here, and there isn't a plan from the writer for how to approach those problems or how to solve those problems, then the jury thinks, oh, if we give money to this person, who's to say that they're really going to be able to adequately approach the questions of the script? And maybe ultimately the script isn't going to get that much better with this money for support. So that's something that's really important. Attaching that story editor and also having a cover sheet talking about your plans for the rewrite or your plans for the work. So I think that we've only got a few minutes and I don't see any other questions. I'm wondering if there's anything from the moderators coming out. All right, well, I just want to thank you all for coming and listening, and I'm really looking forward to talking with you about your projects and hopefully meeting you sometime down the line. I was just on Manitoulin a couple of weeks ago and driving by Weengushk and like waving out the window. Of course, you can't stop because of COVID, but I'm really excited to hopefully get up there sometime really soon. So you can email me at adamgarnet.jones@telefilm.ca. If you go on the Telefilm website and Google or search the word Indigenous, you'll probably be able to find my contact. My contact information is on all of the funding pages if you just scroll down. So yeah, give me a shout, reach out anytime, and good luck, everyone.
Remember that path behind our old house that took us further than any car could. A place to hide when we knew we should. Where we